WhatsApp thing, which a lot of people think. This view is how I understood the game.
Amanda tells us your family has.
This was how I understood the whole game.
The first season of Telltale's The Walking Dead is the game that put the company on the map, and the reverberations of its unexpected success are still being felt throughout the industry. Walking Dead-likes, story-based games with branching narratives built on binary choices, are now a subgenre of adventure game. Without The Walking Dead, we don't have Life is Strange, Dreamfall Chapters, or Until Dawn. Not to mention everything Telltale has released since The Walking Dead has also been in that model. Walking Dead-like is now synonymous with a Telltale game. It's what audiences expect and what people who license properties pay them to make. This hasn't necessarily been good for Telltale, being that nothing they made before The Walking Dead was like The Walking Dead, nothing they've made since The Walking Dead has been as successful, and the people who actually made The Walking Dead shortly thereafter quit the company. This left the all-but-guaranteed Walking Dead Season 2 in the hands of a new team, tasked with revisiting some of gaming's most indelible design, storytelling, and character. Fuck! Let me start again.
I'm going to talk about Senpai.
The first season of Telltale's The Walking Dead is perhaps best remembered for the moment where you, the player, have to decide whether to save Carly or Doug at the end of episode 1. The gravity of this decision is telegraphed very clearly, no matter what you this zombie apocalypse. But they also serve as contrast for the big decisions. The game makes it clear early on that you will be making choices constantly, and that any choice may have repercussions, but who gets to eat and who gets to live will be communicated differently. When you make a high-level, story-branching decision, you will know you're making one. So what stands out about The Walking Dead Season 2 is how it almost never draws that distinction. You rarely know the difference in this game between a high and low-level choice. Sometimes the game tells you a seemingly inconsequential act was a major decision. Sometimes a seemingly important act of bravery is immediately undercut. Sometimes a life you save is taken from you 20 minutes later. Sometimes a simple act of kindness gets someone killed. Everything is riddled with uncertainty. Really, there's only one decision in the entire game that truly resembles Carly and Doug, where someone is going to die and you have to decide with full knowledge who it's going to be, and it's the last decision you make, here, in the snow, between Jane and... Oh, god damn it. Give me a minute.
I wanted to watch this at a different time just so I'm not spoiling
the first season of Telltale's The Walking Dead is, at its core, a game about the relationship between protagonist Lee and the 9-year-old girl he swears to protect, Clementine, and, to a lesser extent, their makeshift community of survivors. Saddling the main character with a child preemptively answers a couple questions the player might otherwise ask. As you manage petty squabbles between a cast of antagonistic characters, any one of whom might get you killed, one question is, why don't I just leave these assholes? The answer being that, however dysfunctional, Clementine is probably safer in a group. The other question is, well, who gives a shit? What are the stakes if some dude we just met is maybe gonna die? How do we guarantee that's a difficult choice? Give players an impressionable child and make her convincing, and suddenly they're asking, what will this do to her? Will a decision protect her, scar her, toughen her up, preserve her innocence? In a game about making choices, that little girl is what makes your choices matter. Also, she's our hope for the future of humanity and our connection to the world before all this, and our main character's shot at redemption, and that's a thing male writers like to do with young girls in dystopias. It's called the dadification of games. I put a link down there. You should read it. It's a thing. But the protagonist of Season 2 is that little girl, grown 2 years older and seemingly a lifetime wearier. This inverts the questions she was originally meant to answer in some interesting ways. She spends a brief early section of Episode 1 separated from any adults, and the first question gets answered pretty handily. Whoa, fuck! Okay. Clementine needs to be in a group. And she quickly finds herself a new makeshift community of assholes. But the second question just hangs there. With no central relationship, the first episode feels like a game in search of meaning. She's making all these hard choices, but what makes those choices matter? Midway through Episode 2, I got my answer. I was coming up on a lodge with my companions, hoping to find shelter and honestly thinking about how much I miss Lee, when out of the crowd walks the second half of Season 2's central relationship. Okay, we're doing this. We don't really talk about Kenny. Turns out everybody's favorite character from Season 1 is alive in Season 2, and Clementine's relationship to him forms the backbone of the narrative. So, Season 2 cannot be meaningfully discussed without discussing Kenny, and the way the game deviates from the design and storytelling of Season 1 cannot be understood without understanding what this new team of writers is doing with the characters. But talking about Kenny is not easy. One thing that makes it hard is that, by the nature of the game, my Kenny won't be the same as yours. But when we first met Kenny back in Season 1, he was just another vision of survivorship, same as most everyone else. We had people who mediated the needs of their family with the needs of the group, people who kept their heads down and just tried to survive, people who abandoned groups to go it alone, etc., etc. And Kenny was there to represent utter devotion to one's family, and how we treated him was our way of expressing how much we agreed with that philosophy. His devotion to family dictated that, for instance, if this old dying man might turn into a walker, you have to smash his head in and argue it's for the greater good. And, at least in the case of my Kenny, first try to get someone to do it with you because you're just a little bit of a coward. And being just a little bit of a coward was the big tragedy of Kenny. He could talk a big game about what was right, what was necessary, and could maybe even think of himself as the strong provider who could protect his family from anything, but only when the walkers were on the other side of a locked gate. Whenever the shit really went down, Kenny folded. All that greater good talk evaporated, he ran from confrontation, and he left all the difficult decision-making to other people. All that really mattered to him was keeping his wife and child alive. The greater community could go fuck themselves. But then the community got raided, his son was bitten, his wife took her own life, and we had to put the child down. So in the end, keeping his family alive...
You don't have to put the child down too, because there's a choice to just
was
leave him.
something he just
But
couldn't do. And that's where Kenny stopped being a philosophy
I gotta
and
actually talk
became
about the choices
something
soon, it's not
else,
this.
something darker. An image of what would happen to Lee if he ever lost Clementine.
Once I saw this video was why I got Season 2 more.
I don't know that.
Also,
Season
I
3
know
I
we're
just
taking
absolutely
forever to get
hate.
to the point, but we will get there. Just hear me out. This is hard. So how Kenny died, or I guess didn't, is pivotal. I know there's a version of this story where if you're nothing but horrible to him for the entire game, he steals a boat and leaves you in Savannah, but in the ending most of us saw, Kenny is presumed dead after sacrificing himself for someone else. For my Kenny, it was Ben, who was, by the way, kinda sorta responsible for the raid that led to the death of Kenny's family, and whom Kenny had been insisting for days deserves to die, but per usual never actually laid a hand on him. While we were escaping a house via rooftop, Ben managed to impale himself falling off a balcony, and rather than let him get eaten by walkers...
What the fuck, Kenny? Lee, it's okay.
We're getting no
This
to the
was
point
my
I need to
Kenny
talk about, but this whole
forgiving
video
Ben.
got me
This was my Kenny deciding that
into
someone other than
Season
his
2 and
own
liking it
blood
more.
could be family. This was my
than
Kenny
not
finally
liking it.
doing what he couldn't do for his own son. Even as a purely symbolic gesture, this one time, he didn't run away. That we find Kenny alive in Season 2 unravels that entire character arc, and that probably should have bothered me, but honestly I was too busy pressing the Hug Kenny button. This is the first moment in the
That's what
second
everyone
game that
does.
just
Well, almost
works.
everyone.
And the way it works is actually pretty sophisticated. See, Clem and Kenny don't really have a pre-existing relationship. They exchange hardly any dialogue through all of Season 1. But Clem's reaction to Kenny is credible and, provided the scene works for us, perfectly reflects our own. We miss Lee because we went through some awful shit with him and now he's dead. And as we feel his absence, we are given Kenny, someone else we've been thinking is dead, someone else with whom we suffered horrible experiences, someone whose role in the first game was to be a mirror for Lee. Kenny is a surrogate for Clem and for us. The game has already started presenting its thesis.
It's a tough world out there without people you can trust.
Which is a roundabout way of saying, who's going to be Clementine's new Lee? And at this point, Kenny seems like the closest we're going to get. And the game is not subtle about the fact that Clem also lets Kenny feel closer to the family he lost.
Pass me that can, Duck.
Duck? Who's Duck?
Duck was his son.
Kenny's new girlfriend Sarita makes it clear that the only reason Kenny is remotely okay with everything that happened in Season 1 is that he's boxed it all up and put it out of mind. So while Clementine reconnects him to what he's lost, she also reconnects him to that trauma. And Kenny almost immediately starts getting erratic and confrontational. And that's not aided by the fact that this is a Walking Dead game, so no sooner is he reunited with Clem than all the horrors of the first game come flooding back into his life. We'll just have to do bullet points from here. So the people Clementine showed up with are apparently escapees from a dictatorial community run by this dude named Carver, who raids the lodge in order to get them back for reasons we're not going to go into right now. Several people die, including one of Kenny's friends, and the survivors are thrown into a truck and hauled off to Carver's camp. Once there, Kenny immediately starts pushing for an escape, and the plan they come up with involves Clementine stealing a couple of walkie-talkies. When Carver finds them missing, Kenny takes the blame, and in retribution, Carver beats him till he's blind in one eye. So, when the escape does happen, Carver is incapacitated, and while they could just leave him, Kenny stays behind to smash his head in with a crowbar, and Clem has the option of staying to watch. Outside, the escapees must pass through a herd of walkers, at which time Sarita is bitten, and while Clem can try to save her, one way or another she dies. And at this point, Kenny really and truly loses his shit and begins lashing out at everybody, but stays close to Clem, because Clem is now all he has left. Hope is rekindled somewhat when Rebecca... this is Rebecca, has her baby, and Kenny the family man falls in love with it. Then while making their way to the next town, they get ambushed by this kid named Arvo and his family, more people die in that shootout, and Kenny takes Arvo prisoner, choosing to keep him alive when Arvo promises them a cabin full of supplies. Still more people die on the way to the cabin, and when it briefly looks like the cabin is bare, Kenny beats the ever-loving shit out of Arvo. By this time, the rest of the group wants so badly to be away from Kenny that they steal a car in the dead of night, and Arvo, for good measure, shoots Clementine on the way out. Clem comes to in the backseat of a car with the only two adults left in her life, Kenny and Jane. This is Jane, screaming at each other, and the fight escalates and escalates and escalates until we're back here in the snow where Kenny is going to stab Jane in the heart unless Clementine shoots him. Fuck me! It's as if these new designers looked at everything the first game was, difficult, complex, emotionally taxing, but ultimately cathartic, and took from that only one adjective: bleak. Midway through the game, I chose to help a scared girl tend plants in a greenhouse, and to repay me for that kindness, in the next scene, Carver threw someone off a roof because I wasn't working fast enough, and that's the game in a nutshell. Traumatize a little girl, give her a bunch of binary choices that don't mean anything, kill secondary characters at random, salt and pepper to taste, and you've got a Walking Dead game. I didn't see what was going on while I was in the thick of it. It took a little while, but I think I get it now. My choices don't matter the way they used to, but that doesn't mean they don't matter at all. And this is still very much a game about a relationship. It's a relationship between a child and the broken, violent, self-hating man who wants to protect her so badly that he just might get her killed. She keeps him near because she knows she might need him, but no one knows better than her what he's capable of. She sees a soft and remorseful side that no one else sees. He's there to take care of her, but she frequently has to play the adult and take care of him. People are constantly telling her to get away from him while he swears up and down that he will always protect her, and he alienates everyone else who might keep her safe. God, it's textbook. Kenny is Clementine's abusive stepfather. I've seen a couple people mention this, though only passingly, and most seem completely unaware, which is so strange to me.
That thing, in this little group that I play games with, nobody talks about that.
Understanding this that the design starts to make any sense. Whether or not you try to save Sarita or comfort Rebecca's baby,
nobody talks about that.
Kill Carver will not affect the plot, and
this
yet
is why I got
telling
season
you
2.
That these are major decisions because they are things Kenny cares about. They are gestures of loyalty. Like Lee wondering, what will this do to Clem? Clem is wondering, what's this gonna do to Kenny? Which is a much more loaded question because Kenny is not just a person she cares about, but also a threat if not handled properly. And the whole game is building up to one final question of faithfulness. See, in the first game, Lee made decisions on Clem's behalf, and she had no say in the matter. The second game begins shortly after the first, where Clementine makes her first painful stumble into the adult world. She gets Omid killed when she leaves her gun unattended. The player has no agency in this scene. You cannot help but leave the gun on the counter. For the first time, Clementine is directly responsible for a person's death, but she does not have the power to prevent it. The arc of the game is bringing her from there to here, where she has the power to get someone killed, recognition of that power, and the ability to choose who it will be. And all the seemingly muddled design is what happens between those two scenes. The moments where she can get someone killed but doesn't realize it, the moments where she thinks she can save someone but she can't. The game does not telegraph the difference between high and low level choices because Clem cannot yet recognize the difference. It's not a game.
That thing was the thing that I've been talking about for the whole time, and yet like other people just like think like, oh hey, that
About empowerment.
This is how I got the game. This is how I understood it.
Zone on the way from one to the
Before
other.
that, I had
It's
like
a
the
game
same
about becoming Lee. About
thought
learning
of it
the
as
choices
them,
you used to make.
but
It's a
now
game
I
about
don't anymore
growing up too fast
because of
under
this
heightened
video. When I saw
circumstances,
this
about
at the time
lurching
of
into adulthood as an
episode 5
act of
finished.
self-preservation. The game's question is, in crossing that threshold,
was
will
like
Clementine
2017.
recognize Kenny for what he is? Now, if we accept this as the game's premise, and acknowledge that it's handled with surprising maturity for a computer game about zombies, we still have to ask, what are the ramifications of asking this question? If the first game was about making you wonder whether you've done the right thing, the second game does something unthinkable if you either shoot Kenny or let him live but then abandon him.
Clem. You made the right choice. This is the right decision, Clem. You're right. Like you usually are.
So the endings where Clementine is away from Kenny and he recognizes that he is a monster are the quote-unquote good endings. But there is still this equally canonical ending where the child watches her father figure murder the only other person looking out for her and then walks off into the wilderness happily ever after with her abuser, and there's a fair number of people insisting that this is their favorite ending. So if a game is going to pose a question this complicated, is it fair to treat both answers as equally valid? And if we can make it through the game without even realizing it's a game about abuse, then is it actually saying anything about abuse? Or is abuse just a subject handled with, yes, honesty and sophistication, but in a game capable of engendering only empathy with and not understanding of abuse? And while empathy is a beautiful thing, and this game can give you a glimpse of what it might feel like on the shit end of an abusive relationship, isn't part of the problem with abuse that it makes people feel this way? If I get to the end of this game feeling nothing but sick, numb, and hopeless, is that an achievement? Is empathy enough? But I confess, the biggest issue I take is this. This is not my Kenny. Late in the game, Jane tells Kenny exactly what he is, and it's a perfect summation of how abuse works.
He loves having anyone around that does what he says. That's why he loves this kid so much. It can't talk back yet.
Fuck you.
You know the thing about people like you, Kenny? You're just a bomb waiting to go off. Everyone talks about you behind your back because they're afraid of you.
That ain't
Mike, Bonnie, Sarita,
fucking liar. That ain't true.
everyone around you knows that sooner or later, they're gonna end up dead. Sarita knew it, I know it, and so does Clementine.
And that exactly describes the relationship he has with Clem in this game, but it's not the relationship they had in the last game, nor is it the relationship he had to Lee, nor his wife, nor his son. Remember, Kenny was the guy who caved, who insisted he needed more control but ran away whenever
This is why I
confronted,
got
who
season 2.
threatened
This is
people with
why I
violence, but then
understood
when
the
the time
game.
came to be violent, either
It's all
backed
because of this
down or
one video.
burst into tears. Kenny's whole tragic
That's it.
flaw was being too weak to take action. It's why he blamed himself for his family's death and why his sacrifice to Ben meant something. So for us to accept that Kenny went from here to here, we have to accept that the pains and losses of the first game turned him into a monster. And that is the broken narrative spit from the lips of 100,000 broken people. People who say, it's not me, it's just this awful world. People who say, if you'd lived my life, you'd probably be the same. People who say, if we could just get through this crisis, everything would go back to normal. It's the narrative abusers tell their victims. They say it's not their fault. Trauma and abuse are not the same thing. And while trauma may be used by abusive people to justify being more abusive, the one does not create the other where it didn't already exist. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand why they did it, why they used him. The whole question of loyalty depends on having some nostalgic memory for a time when things were better. That doesn't work with a new character. But accepting this Kenny, however well-intentioned, means believing that this is just the inescapable result of too much suffering. It means ignoring all the others who've suffered without acting so horribly and absolving him of his
The video's pretty
responsibility
much
for
done,
how
but
he
I have to
treats
still talk.
Clementine. Cliched as it was, the Clem of Season 1 was our ray of hope for the future.
This is for another
One
YouTube
thing
video on
complicating
my
our choices
YouTube
was
channel.
trying to strike that
The day
balance.
after
Can
the
Clem learn
fifth
to
episode's
protect
done.
herself without becoming jaded? Or will the harshness of this reality cost her, for lack of a better word, her soul? Which becomes a stand-in for the soul of humanity, because if a child can't be raised to live in this world without losing hope, what chance does the rest of humanity have? But throughout Season 2, again and again, Clem is given opportunities to choose between hope and something other than hope. Whether or not to rob this stranger of his medical supplies, whether or not to ask this woman to stay with you, whether or not to convince this girl to save herself. And every single time she chooses to trust someone, she is punished for it with betrayal, abandonment, and death. There's no way to finish this game believing hope is anything other than a mistake except to stay loyal to Kenny, which even the designers seemingly don't want you to do. So what is our message? You can't trust anyone? Is the correct ending the one where Clem crosses that threshold into adulthood
Sometimes I think
alone,
this is the
finally
correct
able to
ending,
survive
but
without other people, and
I
prepared
go
to
with
raise a
Jane.
baby by herself as yet another surrogate parent? This
But yo, here's the sound. Sometimes I think that this is the correct ending, even though that's not with Jane or Kenny or both. Like, you can't choose both, but like I'm saying, most of the time I think this is the correct ending. But I never did it before because I chose Jane.
ending is the closest thing to uplift you're going to get without turning your stomach, and it's still a hard one. It's part of that disturbing trend making its way through video games right now, the one that says a female character only becomes strong by suffering at the hands of men. But it is an answer to the game's
Not
question.
exactly.
Who will be Clementine's new Lee? Clementine.
Okay, I gotta still talk about more. But then you go to this. Then you go to this game, and it's one of the most worst games ever in the story because nothing matters. Depending on who you saved, Kenny and Jane, they made the choice so big, and yet they die no matter what in season 3. That choice does not matter at all because then Clementine was not even playable, and yet you play as him, and yet every single choice. Look, you're playing as a grown-up that like understands how to make these like decisions or whatever, and it's not like season 2 and all that what he was just saying. Season 3 I just absolutely hate because of that reason. It doesn't really make sense at all. But I'm gonna still play it for Twitch and all that, and putting it onto my YouTube channel because it's the full game, and it's not Team Kenny. But I mean, this was the reason why I don't like season 3 of Walking Dead. This season, The Walking Dead: A New Frontier is season 3. This is the reason why I don't like this season 3, which I'm gonna play. one day, because then tomorrow I get to Devil in Me. Tomorrow I get back to that game, but I mean, this is why I don't like it. And this whole explaining thing, why I get season two. Sometimes some people think that season two is the most worst season ever. It's season three. Some people think that, but I mean, season two had great characters, great things that happened in it, and yet what he talked about is true. Every single thing was true what he was talking about, and yet you go to the next season, this season, and it all goes downhill. Other than that, other than season one and two, the best season ever, and I can't wait for it, is this. It's one of the best seasons ever. I really wish that they continue it off of this point, and with all the characters that's in the season, like all of them, like maybe like do like a DLC of just Marlon, and you play as him, and you see this whole group. Like that would be cool too. And Lily is in that season too. Like this is one of the best seasons of all time, but yet the New Frontier. I really don't want to play it, but I'm gonna still play it, but I really don't want to. I'm gonna be playing it for jokes, and mainly whenever it's just me here, so I can actually make the jokes and not like whenever there's someone here. But yeah, okay, yeah, that's pretty much it. I gotta see who to rate anyway.